All right, Convenience Store Woman. The book I read is Convenience Store Woman. I was excited about this one. I started reading it because my friends were chit-chatting about it, and I am ultimately a creature completely driven by mimetic desire, and basically I just like didn't really want to get left out of the conversation. The other thing that made me really excited about this book is that it's really fucking short. As I have gotten busier and busier, had I have cultivated a greater interest in novels that can theoretically be read in like one afternoon or easily read in one weekend. And this absolutely fits that categorization. Like it's between, I mean, it's a novella. It's a novella. It's between like a typical length novel and like a long short story. It's uh, it's Japanese, which is an area of literature that I have like an interest in, but not a whole lot of knowledge about. And in my experience, I'm literally going off of like two novels, but in my experience, Japanese novels tend to aim at like fully embodying a certain vibe or a certain feeling, and then that's just like the whole novel, right? They're sometimes a little bit light on plot, they're a little bit light on like development, but they're very, very heavy on characterization and like creating a vibe that is extremely layered. Reading this novel and also reading the handful of other Japanese novels that I've read was like reading an extremely, extremely long poem. Like the thing that you take away from it is a certain type of vibe, and it makes it makes these novels like interesting to read. It makes for a very interesting reading experience, but it makes them a little bit difficult to discuss. Like the tools that I have cultivated and developed for talking about novels don't work as well on these types of novels as they do on other types of novels. And to some extent, I think that this is just kind of what novellas are like as well. Novellas also tend to be a little bit light on plot and generally heavier on like vibes and characterization. Okay, anyway, convenience store woman. What is it about? It's about a woman who works at a convenience store and she really likes it. I got into this novel expecting, and I think this is an expectation that is like cultivated by the novel itself. This is an expectation that the novel anticipates that you're going to have. The story is about a woman who works at a convenience store for 18 years. She starts working there when she's 18, and the novel opens when she's 26 years old, and she's still working at a convenience store. And my expectation is that, okay, this is a novel about a person who is like severely depressed. They feel that they've wasted their life. They're facing down the barrel of a midlife crisis, and they are working a dead end entry level job. And the novel is about someone who is in a situation that in a typical person, in a neurotypical person, would inspire those thoughts. And she instead feels elated. She's so happy. She loves working at the convenience store. Working at the convenience store is her whole life. She knows everything that there is to know about working at a convenience store. Her entire life and her entire mind, body, and soul belongs to this fucking convenience store, and she loves it. She thinks it's incredible. The something that the regularity and utter predictability of a lot of the things that happen in the convenience store is one thing that is like lingered on from time to time. Uh, anyway, in case you haven't picked up on it from my description so far, the protagonist of this novel is definitely autistic. She is definitely on the spectrum. The way that she talks and thinks about this convenience store really gives it away for those who have the eyes to see, and also the attitude that she has. Like, it's kind of clear that her like I get. I don't know if this is a fair characterization, but I at several points during this novel had the thought, oh, like her like special interest is basically this convenience store. She loves to learn more about the convenience store. Anything that is even remotely related to the convenience store is a subject of great interest to her, even if it to the outside world appears to be something like utterly mind numbing. And yeah, she just loves it. Like one example is she talks about how she began the habit of going on afternoon walks, not which is like a good habit to have, right? Like that's a very good habit, but her reason for doing that is not because she thinks it's a good habit to have and she thinks that like uh, you know, it's healthy for her or something, but rather because she wants to be able to survey the neighborhood so that she can keep abreast of any changes in the neighborhood that might have implications for the convenience store. There's a point at which some new like office building was built, right? And demand for a certain product as a direct result of that office building opening, demand for a certain product rose really, really suddenly. And the convenience store basically wasn't ready, and they missed out on a bunch of like profit that they otherwise could have made. And her boss basically got in trouble for this. And so she responded to not her getting in trouble, but her boss getting in trouble by adopting this habit, by becoming becoming this type of person. It's interesting because I think that it questions the values that people come at life with, because I could definitely imagine, especially being a neurotypical person, reading this and seeing it as some kind of nightmare, right? How does this person not understand that the life that they've chosen to live is utterly meaningless and that it's utterly pointless, right? But on the other hand, from an autistic perspective, she's living the fucking dream, man. She has her special interest as a job, and she gets to very closely engage her special interest every single day. I mean, that's the fucking dream, man. Like the rest of us can only imagine. And the main obstacle for her is the fact that everybody looks on this with disdain. That's the main excuse me. That's the main problem that she has, is that everybody sees her working her dead end job, and they view it just as a dead end job. They don't understand that she is achieving her like highest dream, right? There are a couple of kind of like sinister moments. Uh, one thing one thing that comes up is she talks about how if she leaves the convenience store or if she gets sick, right, she will essentially be replaced. She's like a replaceable part. But I don't I definitely view that as sinister, and I definitely view that as a little bit frightening, right? But I feel like it's not exactly a critique of the convenience store per se. It's more just like a social problem, right? It's more so the fact that our society does not have a space for someone who just like authentically wants to do the best job that they possibly can do at this like dead end job. I also think that this novel does a really good job of kind of undermining the concept of like unskilled labor, right? Like there's this idea of like unskilled labor is well, I guess you know what unskilled labor is, right? And there's this idea in left wing like labor oriented circles that unskilled labor is essentially a myth. There's no such thing as unskilled labor. I think that's taking things a little bit too far in the interest of like propaganda. I definitely agree with the sentiment behind there's no such thing as unskilled labor, but like, come on, the concept of unskilled labor is labor for which you do not need any particular training, right? It's labor for which I could pick up a guy off the street and I could just be like, hey, guess what? You're going to do this job now. And he would be like, what? Are you kidnapping me? And I would be like, yes, you're being kidnapped and you're going to, I don't know, move crates for Amazon, right? Essentially all you need to do is be like able-bodied and able to follow instructions. I definitely think the term is like weaponized against labor, and I definitely think that the term is worth criticizing, right? But I do also think that there's this like a reasonable distinction to be made between like labor that could theoretically be done by just like any guy, and labor that you do kind of need special training for, right? But at the same time, this novel really, really emphasizes the extent to which the most unskilled labor you could fucking imagine, which is like being the clerk at a convenience store, right? Actually, there's a lot of difference between someone who's not really very good at that and someone who has a lot of experience. Like this novel really, really emphasizes the extent to which unskilled labor, this term, is highly misleading in that you can develop a skill for unskilled labor, and that can be something that is immensely valuable, right? I get the sense uh, I think the novel wants us to recognize how much this convenience store actually benefits from this woman's like freakish devotion. And this is something that at no point is it recognized that her devotion is in any way beneficial. Even her manager at one point is talking about how it's weird that she still works here and it's a bad thing that she still works here, right? The manager who stands to like gain something from her devotion views it primarily as a bad thing. Another thing that's interesting, it never really gets commented on directly in the novel, but like why the fuck is this bitch not a manager? You know, she's been working here for 18 years. At no point did anyone have the idea of like, hey, this lady's like special interest is the efficient functioning of a convenience store. Like, how is she not in charge? Like, why are we not putting this woman in charge? Um, I think that this goes to first of all, I do think that there's like a feminist critique to be made here, right? I think that if you had like a comparable employee who was a male, I think it's quite likely, and I think the book does want us to consider the possibility that like a male version of this character would be promoted to manager and then maybe promoted to like regional manager of convenience stores or something beyond that point. Um, However, first of all, I'm not sure that this character would actually be necessarily be interested in that kind of work. Um, I'm not sure. I definitely think that she would struggle to work a job that doesn't involve like being in a convenience store a lot. So I'm not sure that she would want to be like head of all convenience stores, but it's definitely very clear that she has some skills that are being not just ignored, but like to the extent that they are recognized, they're viewed as a negative thing. So I do think that there's this interesting critique of like the concept of unskilled labor in that like unskilled labor is essentially labor to which we have assigned a low or negative value and not necessarily labor for which there are no skills that are for which skills are irrelevant. I know that to some people this probably sounds weird in relation to the fact that like 5 minutes ago I was defending the concept of unskilled labor, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that although I think it's true that some labor requires like specialized training, it's also true that like labor that doesn't require specialized training can potentially benefit immensely from people developing skills in that labor. It's kind of interesting. I do think that this demonstrates a contradiction in capitalism, which is that like the system requires the devaluation of certain types of skills while at the same time being reliant on those skills. It's kind of interesting. Like the the part of the reason that this protagonist that her skills are not something that anyone ever fully takes advantage of is because she is in a position where her skills have been devalued. And so even when she like develops them to this fucking cartoonish point of being able to like walk into a convenience store and like breathe in the air and as if it's like an organic organism, she like instantly diagnoses everything that the convenience store needs to run at peak efficiency. Even though she develops her skills to that like ridiculous point, she still isn't recognized for this, and those skills are still like begrudgingly accepted by everyone around her. Okay, I want to come back to the critique, the feminist critique, because I do think there's a feminist critique to be made here, but I think that feminist critique is intimately tied to another critique that I think is a little bit more salient for this novel, which is a disability critique, right? I think that part of the reason that she's never recognized for her skills is because she's autistic. I think a big part of the reason that she is not recognized for these skills is because she's autistic. I think that her approach to these things is very, how do I want to put this? It's very like selfless. Her interest in the convenience store is not like her excitement about her job, her interest in the convenience store is not in the service of something else. And I think that if it were, she would go a lot further in life, right? I think that if she expressed a desire, if she had developed these skills and she said the reason I'm developed and she made it clear like the reason I'm developing these skills is so that I can become a manager and then a regional manager and then a blah 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 blah, or maybe I'm going to open up my own convenience store or something like that. I I think that she would get a lot further, but it just never even like vaguely occurs to her or anyone else in her life for that matter that this is what she should do. And I'm actually not saying that the disability critique like trumps the feminism critique. I actually think you need to read both of them together. Like you're totally missing you're missing something really crucial if you only look at it as one or the other. I think the fact that she's a woman limits her, and the fact that she's autistic limits her. But the real killer is being an autistic woman. Those are the two things that come together to just like absolutely annihilate her ability to fully embody her destiny as a convenience store woman. I also want to oh man, there's so many directions that this can be taken in. I really love the sheer density of thought and ideas and vibes embodied in this novel. But anyway, I have a friend. There's a friend of mine who he says that uh, I'm not quoting him directly, but his basic idea is that like autistic people they need like a manager, right? That's one of the main things that distinguishes highly successful, competent, like well functioning autistic people from people who just like spiral out of control and lose their shit. Is that autistic people need like a like an executive director. And I get that feeling from this woman. Absolutely. Like she's developing these skills, she's developing these competencies, and what she needs is someone in her life who's gonna swoop into her life and say, "Girl, girl, you can get everything you want out of this situation." Like I want to be her big brother here, Like I want to swoop in and be like, "Girl, you can get everything that you want out of the situation. You can still be the convenience store woman. You can do all that stuff, but you need to do it in a way where you're like moving up the ladder, right? You need to use these skills to do something that is going to be well compensated, that is going to be sustainable because one of the things that she recognizes is that she's at a dead end job, and the problem for her is not the prestige. But at some point, like, what if she gets sick? Your job doesn't have insurance. For the last 18 years, you haven't been building up like a retirement fund. For the last 18 years, you've been earning just enough money to eat meals and then go back to work in the morning. And that's good enough for her, right? And she's happy with that because it's like her special interest is working in a convenience store or whatever, and she's been building up these like insane skills, but she needs someone to come along and be like, hey, these skills are valuable and you can go somewhere with them. Why don't you go somewhere with these skills? Why don't you use them to achieve something in life that is like more sustainable? And I'm not saying that she needs to like she's utterly unmotivated by like prestige or the opinion of other people or things like that. But what she needs is to get to a place where she's like being paid more than just the bare minimum to survive, and where she's like building up a building up for a situation in which she can potentially get sick without becoming like poor. I also think one of the problems that she runs into, I'm not sure how much this would solve her problem, but like one of the problems that she runs into is like nobody seems to understand what she's doing. And if someone could like swoop into her life, be executive manager of her life, and be like, girl, your destiny is not to be like an entry level worker for the rest of your life. You're going to become Lord God of convenience stores. You're going to own your own convenience store or something like that. Then I think that she would suddenly become comprehensible to the people around her. They would be like, oh, I mean, this is not what we wanted for you. You were supposed to get married and have kids, but this is at least like a life choice that we can understand, right? And she needs someone who can come in and do that for her. And she doesn't have it. And it's like it's so tragic. Like I want to create the like autistic government bureau of like big brothers who can come in, not in a sinister 1984 way, but who can just come in and be like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. Because she needs that so bad. And what she has instead, she has her big sister. And her big sister is a big piece of shit. The sister is kind of set up as the only person who even remotely understands her. And when we finally meet the big sister, it becomes clear to us, the audience, that what is meant by understand is that the big sister is actually the only one who tolerates her. And girl, that's like, there's a big fucking difference, right? The big sister is the only one who isn't actively like hostile to her life, right? The big sister is the only one who isn't actively undermining her confidence and shit like that. And this doesn't come with some like it doesn't come from a place of like deep acceptance. It comes from a place of like, I guess she's like that. And we haven't even really started talking about the plot of the book. I just have so much to say about the like neurotype status of the protagonist. But anyway, the plot of the book is essentially that one day she's working in the convenience store and she meets this really fucking weird guy. She meets this weird dude, and it took me probably not as long as it takes a typical reader. It took me about 10 seconds to realize what was going on here, which is that this is girltism versus boytism, right? He is a boy autistic, she is a girl autistic. These two things manifest in really different ways. And I wanna kind of talk about that for a little bit first. Um, one thing I really value about this book is I had heard theoretically that girl autism manifests in this like really, really different way. And I kind of didn't fully know and understand what that means. And this book helped me to take some of the theoretical concepts that I had heard about this and to really understand them in a more sort of like visceral and narrative way. So she talks about her childhood, right? And part of her childhood is developing these typical like girltism traits. And one of those is getting really good at masking. Masking is essentially pretending to be a normal person. Boys with autism don't do this nearly. Most autistic people learn how to do this to some extent. It's one of the like core skills. Um, but girls learn how to do this in general. They learn how to do this really early, and boys learn how to do this like late into adolescence. Masking is extremely unpleasant. It's very energy intensive. It's essentially pretending to be a neurotypical, and part of the reason that girls do this really early on is that first of all, the social roles that are assigned to boys are often compatible with being like a weird little freak in a way that the social roles that are assigned to girls aren't. So the penalties for failing to learn how to do this are much higher for women than they are for men. And so what happens is that at a young age, girls become interested in learning these skills, and they also tend to develop social interests that are related to and connected to the skill of masking, the skill of learning how to pretend to be a normal person. So one common like special interest that is associated with this would be etiquette, right? Sometimes people become very, very interested in the formal rules of etiquette because they're essentially looking for a book that they can read that will teach them how to be a normal person. It's quite tragic. Um there's a lot of artistic value to be mined out of the intense state of suffering that is represented by someone attempting to read a book that will teach them how to not be autistic. But there's essentially like a billion different special interests that stem from this desire to like read a book, read a manual of behaviors that will teach you how to be a neurotypical. It never works out, but it does help someone develop these skills of masking, right? And this connection is laid out extremely explicitly. Like if you even remotely know what to look for, you will find it in this book because she starts talking about the convenience store and she talks about how life is confusing. It doesn't make sense. People tell you to do things and they don't really mean it. And she has this example of in the schoolyard, some kids were told that it was like, oh, these kids need to shut up. And she came along and she like hit one of them in the back of the head and the kid stopped talking. And she was like, I made him stop talking. This is what I was told was a desirable state of affairs. And everybody got really mad at her and it was like a big thing, right? And like of course like the reason behind this is really clear to any like you know it's pretty clear, right? It's supposed to be clear to the reader like what she has done here. She has violated the unspoken rule of like, hey, don't like hit kids with a shovel. um she's a kid too at the time. So she has violated the unspoken rule of like don't hit people with a shovel, which no one would ever in a million years think to express explicitly. And she has violated that rule in favor of the explicit desire that was stated, which is like make Billy stop talking. And this is really confusing for her because it's like she's done exactly the thing that was said. She's completely fulfilled the explicit demand. only to find out that there is this hidden demand that no one ever told her about that is much more important than the explicit one that was being requested, right? This is a pretty typical and a very like I think it's very like expressive of the catch 22 that a lot of autistic people find themselves in. But it's such an extreme version of this that even people who are on the spectrum will read the story and will recognize like, girl, you like cannot do that. That is not you're not allowed to do that. So I think it does a really good job of putting even the autistic readers, like yours truly, in the shoes of the allistic audience for this behavior, which is like, you're violating a rule, an unspoken rule that is so deeply baked in that the violation of that rule completely undermines and completely undoes anything else that you may have intended for this circumstance. So that's a story from her childhood that I think expresses where she's at. And that attitude of explicitly fulfilling the explicit demands of those around her is one that suddenly goes from being a problem to being exactly what you're supposed to do when you are in the convenience store. You come to the convenience store and they give you a manual, they give you training, they tell you exactly what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to do exactly that. There's no hidden secret rule that you have to follow. All the rules are explicit. And so obviously, she falls in love. This is a situation that's perfect for her. This is very much like when young autistic girls develop a special interest for like rules of etiquette. It's like you've been some part of you has been looking for a secret rule book your whole life, and all of a sudden here it is. Here's the secret rule book for how you're supposed to behave in order to be like normal. And so our protagonist falls in love with the convenience store for a very similar reason, which is that all of a sudden there is actually a rule book for how a normal person is supposed to behave. And she fucking loves it. She thinks it's amazing. So um I forget why I was explaining all of that. But anyway, her interest in the convenience store is absolutely connected to her neurotype. It's not like a random thing that she's chosen. And the character is very much tied up with this. She starts to develop this um, feeling. I think part of the psychological toll of masking is that you start to feel that you are not a real human being, that you essentially, there's only the mask, and that's the only thing that people can really interact with, right? And for her, this is not a disturbing. The feeling of like disturbance at this is never something that is like explicitly addressed in the book. But I mean, I do start to feel a bit of a lack of like connection with anyone ever at any time as the book goes on, because it's like in order for someone to connect with her, they would have to like care about the convenience store, right? And be able to interact with her on her own terms. And also like her own terms is a really complicated thing, because now that she has learned this formal system of etiquette, she sticks to it really, really closely. And so um like the question of like what is her like authentic voice? What is her true face? It's like, well, they're low key like isn't one anymore, right? There's a whole bunch of masks, and she's learned a very like complicated ritual for adopting new masks and developing new ways of speaking and thinking and stuff like that. And underneath all of that, there is a true self, but it's like deep, deep down, and it's not something that it would ever come naturally to her to like reveal to someone. And it would also be like very unpleasant for most people to interact with this person for whom like, what if I hit a kid with a shovel is like a very immediate thought, right? Like that's not a type of person that a lot of us want to have an interaction with. So I think it develops this like this like antisocial, deeply, I don't know how to put it, but like isolated. It's neither these words don't quite capture it. It's this feeling that even when you're interacting with people, they're not interacting with you. And I think this book does a good job of capturing that, or at least like gesturing towards that feeling. So the protagonist develops this technique for learning how to speak, which is, first of all, following the rules of the convenience store. And I actually really empathized. I really understood. I really connected with this feeling, because I too am an autistic person, and I too worked a customer service job. And I also found a an intense pleasure in the part of the job that was social interactions where the script has been written and I can just learn it and then I can just do the script every time almost exactly the same way. And there's room for like creativity and improvisation and stuff inside the script, but there is a motherfucking script and you can just like read it and learn it and do it, and then people will not scrutinize you very much, you know? People will be like, ah, a normal customer service interaction. Lovely. And I really liked that. Even, I mean, not to the extent that convenience store woman likes it, but by far my favorite. So I worked in the Starbucks, right? And by far my favorite part of working in Starbucks was do, manning the register because, first of all, it's like relatively easy, and second of all, you get to have these like social interactions with people that are completely rule bounded, right? Like you get to just follow a set of rules in social interactions, and the rules are explicit and they're stated, and people value you following the rules, right? And outside of that context, social interactions are very complicated. There are rules, but no one's ever told them to me, right? So yeah, I really understood that part of her interest in the convenience store. It just never went to the same extent for me. Okay, the other thing is, and this is a very like girltism attitude. She starts developing a set of voices and a set of attitudes that are essentially stolen from the people around her, and the people around her start to like her very much, and it develops she develops this kind of feeling. There's a song, I don't even know the song, I only know one lyric. I heard it and I was like, damn, that's so true. um it was oh, you like my personality, thanks, it's yours. And I think this character really embodies that, oh, you like my personality, thanks, it's yours attitude, because she essentially picks and chooses bits of like the way that people speak around her. She develops all of these different voices that are essentially a copy of the people around her. To some extent, this is a normal human process, right? Like copying the way of speaking of our parents and of our friends, and like learning different inflections and stuff like that. But for her, this is a very mechanical and explicit process in a way that is very like I think it embodies this vibe of like kind of pretending to be human, which I think is a feeling that a lot of autistic people develop as they get good at these skills. Is that like, oh, I've learned how to pretend to be human. And she starts to, I guess, think about this process a little bit more explicitly, in that like it is very narcissistic of other people that they start to like her, because it's like, oh, you like my personality? Well, you're fucking looking in a mirror right now and you're pointing at it and you're saying, oh, what an interesting person. And she starts to wonder like what it would she starts to wonder a little bit like what it would be like to talk to people in a way that wasn't essentially just a reflection of their own uh, personhood, which I think is really interesting. It's like I think it places the like we tend, I suppose, to think of these strange situations as being like the responsibility of the person who has developed this complex series of masks. But I also think that these interactions like to some extent lay the blame with the neurotypicals in the situation, that like, you know, I'm just trying to learn the rules of your world, and if the rules of your world are, if I pretend to be you, you will like me, that says a lot more about you than it says about me, right? It says almost nothing about me. The only thing it says about me is that I want to be liked by the people around me, and what it says about you is that you're um basically a narcissist, right? You basically really like people that are essentially like you. And yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. There's also this really unnerving situation. The book doesn't really delve into it. It comes up and then we move past it. But there's this really unnerving situation where one of the characters starts to kind of like see past the mask, right? One of the characters is like, you know, I've noticed that you always what is it? You always express a strong opinion that is that is the group's opinion, right? You always express the opinion that other people around you have already started to express, and I've never seen you express your own opinion, right? So this character starts to kind of like see behind the mask, and it's funny because like I think that she starts to see behind the mask and she views it as a sort of like partial vision because she doesn't really see anything, but that not really seeing anything is what's there, right? The nothing, there's nothing there, right? Maybe there once was something there, but that thing has started to like become smaller and smaller and smaller, as the mask has become like more successful. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Okay. Anyway, this has all been background to like the sort of halfway plot this novel starts to have, and then backs out of. The plot is that there's a guy who starts to work at the convenience store one day, and he's really weird, and everybody's like, "This guy's a real fucking weirdo." And within like 1 second of meeting this character, I'm like, oh my god, we've got girltism as the protagonist, and then we've got boytism as this other character. It's going to be a love story, you know? It's a love story about a deeply weird autistic man and a deeply weird autistic woman, and they learn to love each other, and they come together and they smooch, and it's going to be fucking beautiful. Um, and one thing that the novel does that I think is so brave, so epic, is that it continues to its commitment of not like normal washing autistic people by making the autistic man the most like deeply alienating, fucked up little freak. And it's fucking awesome. I love it. This guy is, he never uses the term incel, but he's some kind of incel, right? He has not been able to have sex, and he's starting to be really, really concerned about this fact. Another typical boy, another like very typical boytism trait, right? Is that once the boy autistics, once they hit puberty, if they're straight, they start to really, really worry about having romantic success, right? And this is a character who has failed to have romantic success for a very long time. And his idea is that he's gonna come work in the store, and he's gonna use this as a way to like find a wife, right? And that's how he puts it. He's like, I need to find a wife. And then later it's like, I need to find a wife so that I can well, he starts talking about it in some like less savory ways, but he's explicitly like, I need to come work here so that I can find a wife. One thing that I find really interesting about this, the book never like lingers on this idea. I don't think that this is that like unusual of a thing to do, right? When it's stated explicitly, it's a bit unsavory, but I do absolutely think that allistic people put themselves in the situation of being like, I have entered into this like life path, basically. I've entered into this career so that I can find a partner, get married, settle down, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's like a super typical thing to do, but I think there is a way to do that and express those ideas that would be read by people as being like, okay, that's an acceptable thing to do, but it's a little weird. This is not that, right? He's extremely explicit about it. He doesn't know enough of the like secret codes and secret ways of behaving to make this decision appear as anything other than like deeply alienating and strange. And so he basically kind of like hits on all of the like female employees and all of the female customers and does things that get read as like low-key stalking. He's like, "Oh, where do you live? Maybe we can meet up in a different, outside of work." And he's saying these things to like female customers that he just met, right? So the dude gets fired like basically instantly. And then the protagonist meets up with him outside of work, and they sort of like mutually um mutually kind of just like adopt each other, which is really funny. It's a really funny thing that happens. A friend of mine said that made a joke about dating autistic people, which is that autists are like ducks at the park. You can literally just go and take one home. And I think that that idea is like kind of expressed by this scene, right? Essentially, they start living with each other on accident in that the protagonist realizes that this guy needs a place to stay, and she's like, okay, you can like sleep on the couch at my house, like you can sleep in my house, whatever. And he just like comes to her house, and she's like, okay, I guess you can just like keep living here, right? And he expresses this idea as they're hanging out together, this deeply alienating, fucked up, horrible idea that is like, I think expresses Boytism really well. He has a sort of like intellectual concept that he's interested in, and that intellectual concept is prehistory. And part of what's interesting to him is that prehistory extends the possibility of understanding the modern world and understanding modern like social contexts in a way that that like makes it really interesting to him, right? Like he is interested in understanding prehistory, but I would say that the interest is not exactly prehistory per se. It's more like evolutionary psychology. He has like a special interest in evolutionary psychology, and so he constantly attempts to explain things in terms of like people's natural environment and like the village and like the ancient mindset that we're in, and he constantly reminds her that like humanity hasn't progressed since the stone age, we're still blah 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 blah. One thing that I think is really funny about this, I think this portrayal of autism is far less sympathetic than the one the portrayal of girltism. It's very much like a portrayal of what it would be like to have a male special interest, but like from the outside, right? His special interest is portrayed as more of a like goofy obsession, and a he's never portrayed as like particularly knowing a lot of stuff, which I think is a key feature of having a special interest, is like it's not just a topic that you bring up all the time. It's a topic that you think about in all sorts of different ways, and it's quite difficult to not develop some sort of expertise in that topic over time. And nonetheless, he is like never really portrayed as having any type of expertise or deep knowledge about evolutionary psychology or about the Stone Age. It's sort of just a thing that he brings up all the time. It's just like his particular way of understanding the world, right? Even though I think, as someone who like knows about autism and knows about the way that people tend to relate to their special interests, I can understand that his focus on the Stone Age is an analog in his psychology to her focus on the convenience store, right? But the novel certainly doesn't really view things that way. The novel views his focus on the Stone Age as being like, I mean, it kind of adopts her perspective, right? It views his focus on the Stone Age as being like, "Ugh, you know, what's wrong with you? And I was like, oh man, this author is fucking cooking, right? Like they're taking this perspective. There's this meme that essentially about autistic people that is essentially like there's nothing more disgusting to an autistic person than seeing another person who's like 1% more autistic than them, right? And this guy is the proverbial like 1% more autistic person. Like she looks at him and is like, oh oh, you know, you're a goofy little fuck up, right? And he views her the exact same way, and yet they end up in this bond where they're like living together relatively quickly. And he keeps talking about how essentially if you're different from other people, if you're a different type of person, if you are not a neurotypical, he never uses those terms, but if you don't fit in, the village will like ruthlessly exclude you and you will be unable to participate in society and blah blah blah, all that stuff. Like his framework of like evolutionary psychology and the village that we're still in, and we haven't, you know, man, we haven't really progressed at all since the Stone Age. That's how he says it over and over again. uh, that framework essentially views both of them as social outcasts, and he's pretty adamant on the fact that he's a social outcast, but she's like a double social outcast, you know, because she's a woman. He's a social outcast, and what that means is that he's going to be unable to acquire a mate, and he's going to be basically like viewed as a big piece of shit. And she is a double social outcast because on top of that she's a woman, so she's going to be basically viewed as like used up goods, and it's going to be even worse for her than it is for him because as a man, this is another incel idea that he expresses, but he basically says that as a man, as you get older your value increases, and as a woman, as you get older your value decreases. And uh, and you know, that's an incel idea right there that he has like independently invented. And so he basically calls her. He says like, "Look, we're in the same boat, but not really. You're in an even worse and shittier boat." Which I think is funny because I do think it's true. They're in the same boat. That boat is called autism, but they're at the same time not in the same boat because she has a job and she takes care of herself and she is like able to function independently, and he doesn't have a job. He, you know, immediately gets fired, and it's hinted at. I mean, hinted at. It's pretty clear that after this, he's like homeless, and he's in a very desperate situation, right? So he is in fact in a much shittier position than she is. He is in a worse position than she is, and she eventually like uh, he becomes like her dependent for a little while, right? And so he's like dependent on her. And he's actually very, he doesn't have any cognitive dissonance about this. He talks about how like some people in society are leeches and his aspiration is to be a leech on her. He said that explicitly, like, good job, buddy. Like you're not gonna achieve that goal if you're so clear about it. But he does say one thing that she eventually becomes pretty interested in, which is that a big part of their problem is that they're viewed as being big pieces of shit because they have essentially abandoned the traditional way of living their lives. And the traditional way of living your life is that you're supposed to get married and then have kids. And so he says, I forget who actually comes up with the idea, but he is like at least maybe like he comes up with like 70% of the idea. She comes up with the other 30%. I forget who actually says it out loud first, but the idea is like, what if we just get married then, right? We're already living together. I think this is an arrangement that is like tolerable to both of us. If we get married, that will essentially give us the shield that we need in order to just continue living our lives as we have before. And this plan is what makes it clear to her that all of her so-called friends and her supportive like big sister are actually, I mean, it doesn't make it clear to her. I'm not sure it makes it clear to her, but it makes it clear to the readers. And she certainly talks and thinks about this, that all of these like allegedly supportive people have actually just been tolerating the way that she lives her life. They don't actually support her, right? Because as soon as she announces her intention to get married, they're all like, "Oh, thank God, you can finally leave that stupid convenience store job," right? And she's like, "What the fuck? Like, the whole point of getting married was that these people would leave me the fuck alone about this, finally." And essentially, when she realizes that she does leave the convenience store job for a little while and immediately spirals into like a horrible depression, as anyone who understands who this character is and like how her neurotype works would predict, right? But everyone's been like, leave the store, leave the store, leave the store. She leaves the store and it immediately ruins her life. And she's like, I have to go back to the store. And it's at this point that you realize that this was a love story the whole time. But it's not a love story between girl autistic and boy autistic. It's a love story between girl autistic and the convenience store with which she is deeply infatuated. So she dumps the guy. She's like, my true calling is to be the convenience store woman. And she realizes that some way, somehow, she's gonna make this thing work with the convenience store. And the way it happens is really funny, which is that she just kind of she needs to buy something and she goes into a convenience store and she just sort of goes into convenience store mode, right? She just starts like rearranging things in shelves so that they would be people would be more likely to like purchase things. She starts like restocking shit and people eventually are like, "You're a crazy person. You don't even fucking work here. Like what's wrong with you?" And she realizes that this is her destiny. And it is a love story. It's a beautiful love story. It's a love story um between the woman and the convenience store. And one thing that I just find so like inspiring about this book is that even though I think for autistic people the concept of an authentic self is very convoluted and very strange and it becomes a bit difficult to talk about, essentially essentially I think like what this book reveals is that the concept of an authentic self is both like deeply inaccessible to this type of person and also deeply accessible, right? She is in a sense incapable of being anything other than her fully authentic self, and her fully authentic self is something that other people look at and they might not understand and they might simply view it as a form of inauthenticity, which is a fucking convenience store worker. You know, she comes to the convenience store and she starts rearranging stuff on the shelves, and that is an expression of her like true deepest self, even though other people look at her and they see something wrong. And I think that's beautiful, and I think it's amazing. And yeah, this book is fucking awesome. I love it so much. It might be one of my new favorite novellas. If somebody This is one of the books that like if somebody's like, what is being autistic all about? I'm like, bam, read this book, you will understand a certain type of autism. Maybe you won't understand, but you'll at least have seen it. You'll at least know what it is. You'll know what it is that you don't know, you know? And Okay, yeah, that's Convenience Store Woman. It's also a very short book. If you've gotten to this point in the video, this is like, you've spent at least a fourth of the time that you would need to just read the entire book. So if you liked this video, if you got to this point in the video, I have to say you probably would just enjoy like reading the whole book. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there before I make another hour-long video. Uh, okay, Convenience Store Woman. It's amazing. It's incredible. It changed my life. It's beautiful. I love it. Um, 10 out of 5 stars. Bye bye.